Hi, I'm Kyle, and I'm starting to think that most guys don't really know how girls work. For example, over the last few months, I've had multiple comments about how I'm clearly wearing a wig in these videos. I'll admit there was a fairly sudden change in my personal style, but people also seem to have forgotten that hair can grow. Like, if you knew what wigs actually looked like, you know I never worn one in any of these videos. Except this one. Never try and predict my next move. When I was growing up, girl stuff was stupid. It was a known fact. It didn't matter what gender you were, there was an objective hierarchy, and chick flicks or anything that didn't involve war were at the bottom of the media barrel.
Is this a kissing book?
Twilight was just a trashy romance novel for middle schoolers, and I knew that because I heard it from a group of guys in my class who had never read any of the books or watched any of the movies. Rom-coms? Boring. Reality TV? Garbage. Musicals? Gay, and that's a bad thing because it's 2005. Sailor Moon and Barbie? Who am I? My friend's kid sister? No thank you, I watch Pokemon and play with Bionicles like the straight kids. But 20 years later, I've had some time to reflect, and I wonder if maybe I judged the girly stuff a little too harshly. After all, the world has clearly moved forward, and now girl-centered media is treated with the reverence it deserves. As we can see by the totally chill response the internet has had to. Maybe I have some room these days for frivolous romance and low-stakes slice-of-life stories. After all, I've watched about 1,000 heroes' journeys by now, and it's getting more than a little predictable. Time to mix it up with something cute and sparkly. Like Twilight, it's literally about falling in love with a sparkly vampire. Okay. That was weird. Maybe that's a bad example. It was written by a Mormon. How about Hunger Games? That's like the OG YA apocalyptic love triangle, right? Girly stuff. Okay, what do we got here? The movies must be different. Hollywood has to make things more exciting for a broader audience. The girls are all reading the books first, so that must be where the real sappy stuff is.
Her golden hair had been shorn to the skull. Her golden eyes had been plucked out. She was twitching where she had been impaled on the post.
Is this a kissing book?
Did I pick up the right thing? What has happened? I'm just trying to find one of those famously naive and pointless romance stories where a girl who's a little rough around the edges has to pick between two flavors of gorgeous hunks. You know, devoid of any historical importance, emotional trauma, or large-scale consequences. Your guilty pleasures, your bodice rippers, your escapist melodramas. A shallow, contrived, whimsical romance fantasy. You know, girl stuff. What's a good option? How about, Outlander.
We will remember this moment for the rest of our lives.
Hi, I actually have to pause this joke because I can't show you any more of that scene without losing my channel. Turns out, girl stuff is absolutely horrifying. You all lied to me.
But I'm in the trees, I'm in the breeze, my footsteps on the ground.
Did you know that every day, David Zaslav, CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, kicks down my front door and personally demands all the ad revenue generated from these videos? That's why you should check out patreon.com/doormonster, the only reason I get to keep making these. My assistant writer Cassandra has not been paid in 4 months, and she's getting very hungry and will not be fed until we reach at least 2,000 subscribers. In exchange, you'll be notified anytime I post something new, unlike on some other websites. Plus, you can download these videos to watch offline, and you'll get access to other Patreon exclusive content. Massive thanks to everyone who's already subscribed. You are literally the reason all of these videos exist. Also, we don't have a sponsor for this video, so I just want to take a moment to shout out Blackmagic. They're the company that makes DaVinci Resolve, which is the editing software that I use, and I've been telling people to switch over to it for years at this point. I finally made the switch away from Adobe like 3 years ago. And oh my god, it is such an improvement. The reason it's coming up now is because they found the channel and like it. I had a brief conversation with one of the representatives and they gave me a couple more keys for Resolve so that I could get more people on the team editing. They didn't even ask for an ad. They're just cool and want to like help small creators. And it just reminded me that I wanted to take a minute to tell any editors out there to get DaVinci Resolve. It's amazing. It's actually designed by editors. Like they know how to make the tools work the way you want them to work. Anyway, that's it. DaVinci Resolve. It's free unless you want to pay for the bigger version. I would describe the prevailing cultural attitude towards women's media as dismissive at best. Generally, male-coded stories are viewed as universal human experience. Things like war, politics, drugs, freedom, kung fu, serious topics that can only be handled by a true auteur and only understood by the smartest of smart boys. I'm not here to shit on any of these movies. The Wolf of Wall Street is both incredible art and a deeply disturbing look at the American upper class. Saving Private Ryan is an unrivaled depiction of the horrors of war. I love a good action movie as much as the next guy, especially if it's also a 2-hour-long car chase through the desert and a metaphor for the overconsumption of war-hungry governments. But what I've noticed is that these movies tend to get treated as inherently serious just for tackling these topics, while women's media covering similarly dark things are diminished as childish, frivolous, unserious fluff just because the chosen metaphors to convey these same themes tend to be like romance or supernatural fiction. Quick question, in which of these famously gritty fantasy stories is the protagonist imprisoned in a hell cave, mentally and physically tortured until near death, drugged and sexually assaulted for several months straight, forced to murder 2 innocent people, and eventually brutally killed when the villain telekinetically crushes every bone in their body like Vecna from Stranger Things, all while their love interest watches helplessly from the sidelines? The answer is none of them. These are stories for cowards. I'm describing a court of thorns and roses. The understanding of this hierarchy is completely backwards. Girl media contains some of the most disturbing, deeply emotionally complicated, unresolved pain and horror I have ever encountered in storytelling, and it's about all the same topics. These movies that get labeled silly love triangles are about power, violence, autonomy, bodily destruction, fear, and nobody seems to know this. I mean, I guess women do. But nobody bothered to ask. Even if you don't consider women's media to be less serious or valuable, you've likely interacted with people who do, or even subconsciously internalized negative opinions about some movie or book or trope that you didn't know anything about. And that's a shame, because it's keeping you from experiencing some of the best stories you'll ever encounter. Before we get started, we need to get clear on exactly what we're talking about, because saying something is for girls or for boys can have dozens of meanings depending on who's saying it. When I say girl movies, I'm referring to a story that examines its themes from a woman's perspective, which is unique from the broader human experience. Boy movies are the same thing, but for guys. Pride and Prejudice, classic girl movie. Star Wars, that's a boy movie, even the one starring a girl. The Lord of the Rings, boy book, girl movie. We claim those. This may be where I lose some of you, but I'm operating on the understanding that each gender on average has very different experiences in life than the other. You can disagree, but statistically, I know more about this than you do. Girl movies can be enjoyed by non-girls, and boy movies can be enjoyed by non-boys, obviously. Sharing and communicating your unique experiences is the point of art, and I think it's the easiest first step toward developing empathy for other people. I've mentioned this to some effect in these videos before, but storytelling reveals more about someone's mind than I think any other form of communication. It's revealing the author's perspective and thoughts. Even if the story is absurdist fiction, even if it's made for other people, you're getting a direct look inside someone's mind and how they perceive the world. Since everyone unavoidably writes from their own perspective, and our mainstream media has been and still is largely dominated by male writers, we have culturally come to see boy movies as the default perspective, while girl movies are less readily acknowledged or praised. A lot of people would disagree that this dichotomy even exists. A lot of those same people are the ones who would dismiss the woman-centered stories I'm referring to, usually not because they've consciously identified them as a woman's perspective, but have identified the story as pointless or childish because of any one of a collection of feminine attributes. Things like having a primarily female cast, musical numbers, romance plots. To differentiate between my use of the term girl movies and these sorry excuses to avoid them, I'll just refer to this as cooties, because that's basically how it's treated. Like, overexposure to any one of these things will strip away your masculinity. And I think it subconsciously keeps a lot of people from experiencing some important keystone media and valuable representations of the female experience. Let's take a look at one of the most prevalent examples, the love triangle. Male stories tend to treat romance only as a subplot to the overarching narrative. Their story's central focus will be about the quest the man is going on, and the woman who's accompanying him can change without the main storyline being affected in any meaningful way. Even if she dies, its narrative significance mostly will amount to another challenge along his journey. So for romance to be featured prominently in a story from the boy movie perspective, it must be hollow and frivolous. I think the term love triangle is applied too loosely. As long as a story contains 2 or more potential love interests, it's given this label, and an assumption is made that the story is about the lead actress being torn between multiple equally appealing men who are fighting for her favor, like a Bachelorette situation.
What's a girl to do when she's stuck between men?
Because that's how love triangles are usually depicted in male-centric mediums when they appear, like Kate, Jack, and Sawyer in Lost, or a lot of anime does this, but that's not how it works in girl movies. The protagonist of a female perspective love triangle isn't just choosing a boyfriend flavor. The person she's choosing is representative of the direction of her entire story. The dilemma Bella faced between Edward and Jacob was more than just a question of who was hotter. It was Bella choosing to either marry into a globe-spanning supernatural small mob family, or face down the world with her tight-knit wolf pack, and which of those you would choose as the person inserting yourself into this story. She's picking who she's going to become. Narratively, it's the fork in the road, the representation of the protagonist choosing what she values most and her ultimate fate. While men's stories tend to be about forging your own path, breaking out of the mold, and becoming a unique person all on your own, women's stories tend to be about getting swept along in the current of life and being forced into making decisions that you're not ready to make. And the man they choose to partner with is one of those decisions. Men's stories are very much about the impact an individual has on life itself and how they alter or change a natural law or social norm of the world, whereas women's stories focus on how life's circumstances have an impact on you as an individual. Katniss isn't choosing between a blonde and a brunette, she's choosing between taking care of herself and healing from her trauma or embracing her role as a resistance leader. Claire from Outlander is choosing between helping the Scottish resistance fight for a doomed cause or returning to her post-war marriage in a recovering modern world. It's also about who these men are as people. The men in these particular stories are rarely just pretty faces attached to intangible values, they're in-depth characters with their own goals, motives, and eccentricities. They offer her different things just like in real life. These relationship stories are about love and where that really comes from, which is the furthest from a trivial topic that anything could possibly be. It's one of the most motivating factors of people's lives. It's essential to mental health. Entire wars get fought about it. Even if these stories were only about love, it's absurd to pretend like that's something innately unworthy of your attention. But also, if that's your criticism, it's clear that you haven't read or watched any of these stories. Let's take a look at The Hunger Games. This is a girl movie. You might think it's not because you're not a girl and you've been a fan since before the movies came out, but that just makes you an outlier. Congrats. The Hunger Games is an easy example to use because it became more mainstream than the others, and a lot of people are well aware that to call this a love triangle for children would be hilariously stupid. But it is still often regarded as exactly that by people who have never engaged with it. Even with the popularity of the films, surveys consistently report over half of the fan base are still women. That's pretty high for something considered for everyone, on account of things that are supposedly for everyone usually just being boy movies. For comparison, The Marvels, the Marvel movie about all the girls, ended up only netting a 33% female audience. But none of that is the reason why it's a girl movie. It was written by Suzanne Collins about a young girl in an advanced state of oppression. It focuses on themes of autonomy and survival that serve as not so exaggerated representations of the struggles of many women across the world today. It's still frequently dismissed as another story in the pile of YA dystopian stories that dominated fiction in the early 2010s, which are generally considered to be for girls derogatorily because they often contain the aforementioned cooties. If you've actually engaged with the text, you're aware that The Hunger Games is a scathing anti-capitalist story about wealth exploitation and the way that society's elite will use, abuse, and harm the lower classes for their own enjoyment or privilege. The series was inspired by Suzanne noticing the stark contrast of realities as she flipped between the coverage of the war in Iraq and reality TV. Girl shit. The actual Hunger Games part, where they're all put in the arena and have to fight each other, that's a tiny sliver of the story and is entirely irrelevant by the third book. It's only the beginning of the horrors that Katniss faces, the physical pain she endures, being turned into a propaganda machine against her will, losing her loved ones. Even in the movies, which don't quite reach the full depths of the books, the tone is grim from the start. It's not a fun, gimmicky YA sci-fi thing. It's a story about how children are forcibly taken from their families and made to kill each other in an arena, and the rest of the population in this universe treats this as frivolous entertainment. It's a story about experiencing the worst things imaginable and not being taken seriously. Girl shit. And that's just the light, easy part at the beginning. As for the supposed love triangle, Katniss has two separate relationships. One is with Gale, a guy she grows up with and likes and gets separated from when she volunteers to go to the games in place of her 12-year-old sister. She's presumed inevitably dead, and he immediately takes care of her mother and sister for her in her absence. When she miraculously returns from the event that absolutely should have killed her, they continue to try to make their relationship work, even as things crumble into all-out war. They get separated several more times, and they each take on different roles within the resistance. Then there's Peeta, a boy from her district who she doesn't know all that well and doesn't like much at first. He comes up with the actually brilliant idea of pretending to be in love with each other and later claiming a faux pregnancy to earn sympathy from the elites who hold influence over their literal survival. He saves their lives multiple times and falls in love with her, and they trauma bond over being in the Hunger Games together. And it just gets more and more complicated the more that they go through, including Peeta getting kidnapped by the government and brutally tortured into thinking Katniss is his worst enemy. So, not exactly a high school girl picking which crush she wants to take to the prom. And this is true pretty much across the board. Not to give too much away, but in ACOTAR, things don't really go the way you expect them to either. Those books intentionally use the expected language of romance novels to instead subvert the commonly held tropes they exist within. If you've read the books, you know that the term love triangle triangle is not applicable to this situation, nor is the term fairy porn, which is the label chosen to dismiss this particular genre of women's fiction. There are sex scenes in the book. I'd say they take up about 5% of it, in between the politics, world building, war strategizing, and trauma recovery. It's just such an insane gap between the assumption of what these stories are and what they actually have to offer. I'm not exaggerating when I say there are moments in this series that would have to be toned down before being tame enough for an HBO adaptation, and yet you most likely first knew about it as a trashy romance novel. And this isn't unique to high-concept sci-fi fantasy. Almost all women's media is treated this way. Love triangles are perhaps the most prolifically misunderstood trope, but if it's made for women, you can guarantee that it's likely been dismissed offhand and hides deep, dark secrets that no one could possibly know about, unless they just fucking watched them. Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, that silly little girl story about 4 young adults mailing each other a pair of jeans. Everyone seems to forget that it's actually about each of them going through their own gauntlet of traumas, like falling into an inappropriate relationship with an older man to deal with their mother's suicide, befriending a little girl dying of leukemia, or finding her estranged father has now replaced her with a new family. Hairspray, that wacky little musical about the fat girl with the big hair, just a little high school drama about wanting to be on television, John Travolta in drag, and oh yeah, the civil rights movement. Do you only know Dirty Dancing as a Patrick Swayze thirst trap? That's because you clearly never watched the scene about a teenage girl having to secretly get an illegal abortion. Don't get me started on things like Matilda or Coraline, actual nightmare fuel. These movies successfully lifted the scariest parts of being a child from my mind and put those feelings on a screen for me to watch. The mismatch between content and reputation starts early with girls' coming-of-age stories. Even their kids' movies constantly have this feeling of violation and dread that never quite lifts by the ending, no matter how hard they fight, while their male counterparts usually get to hero's journey their way through a single trauma and come out better for it. Boy coming-of-age stories are more like Hulls. Fantastic movie. Excellent themes, emotionally resonant. It's just that the main character's journey is ultimately resolved by fixing the source of the conflict, and then they all get to be rich and hang out with baseball players. I made a video about the hero's journey already, and how it's a pretty distinctly male story. Not a bad story, but it's an experience shared by people who are caught up in an established system, realize something is missing, and have to journey away from their supposedly idealized life to discover some truth about themselves and return changed for the better. The hero's journey is unique to people near the top of the social hierarchy, who coincidentally are also the ones making most movies and assuming that their experience is universally applicable. Women aren't doing that. They don't get to. They have to navigate the world completely differently, and the stories they write reflect the other side of the coin. Juno is a fascinating and incredibly well-made example of how girls' coming-of-age stories are different, because in this movie there are 2 teenage characters going through the same event. Juno and Polly have sex, she gets pregnant, and now they're both having a baby as high schoolers. But while Polly continues to live a mostly ordinary life while just mentally grappling with the consequences of his own actions, Juno herself is having to make decisions about whether or not to have the baby, negotiate with the adoptive family, navigate a very inappropriate affair with the adult man she's giving her child to, and then actually be pregnant and give birth, none of which goes the way she wants it to. And then the movie ends with the couple just kind of going on with life. And I think it's a great reflection of the difference in experience between real men and women, because they both just went through the hardest thing they've ever been through, while both still having to navigate their normal lives and go to high school. They both have their own story of this adult thing that happened to them when they were kids, and the anguish it caused and the plans it disrupted, and they both reconvene as equals and they stay friends as if they just went through the same shit. But they didn't, did they? Michael Cera didn't go through any of that shit. He's going through his own struggle, but it's objectively less intense, and most importantly, it has an ending. He even gets the girl back. Meanwhile, Juno went through trial after trial, disappointment after disappointment, and her relief is just in returning to some sense of normalcy. And the story structure is actually pretty common in films for and about young girls. It's what we'll call the heroine's labyrinth, and there's a great video essay by a YouTuber called Girl on Film talking about how this often appears as physical mazes or labyrinths in movies, like in Alice in Wonderland, Coraline, or Labyrinth with David Bowie and the puppets. There are recurring symbols and events unique to these stories, like a humanoid but off-putting guide character, a sinister sexual or emotional tension with the villain, or constant traps disguised as something safe or comfortable. Oftentimes, a character from the girl's real life will be recast as a malicious character in the fantasy world, like the other mother from Coraline, or the pale man from Pan's Labyrinth, or the villain in Outlander being related to and played by the same actor as Claire's husband. Even when the labyrinth is less literal, the difference in women's women's stories is very noticeable. Contrary to the hero's journey, which involves the protagonist venturing away from some sort of safe, mundane world out into danger, and then returning once they've completed their mission, the heroine's experience involves that danger coming to her doorstep, luring her in with promises of what she wants most, and then trying to consume her. Girl movies especially lean into metaphor to tell their stories, and then those metaphors become part of the visual language that gets used to dismiss these stories outright. The cooties. The metaphorical elements get used to create a heightened reality to help process and contextualize the experience. Things like pop stars, Victorian romance, vampires, werewolves, which brings us back to Twilight. Not the first girls' media to garner mass cultural hate, and far from the last, but quite possibly the most perfect storm of everything we've talked about. In 2005, the first Twilight book was being read by every high school girl in America and her mother and her mother's mother. And that's because it was the first of its kind. Supernatural romance wasn't a genre yet. Vampires had not been updated to a modern concept. Even film adaptations of other popular media weren't common, not like they are now. This was before even Iron Man. And the experience was all about bonding with other women. It was a group activity. You and your family and your friends all read these incredibly unique books and compared what everybody would do if they were in Bella's shoes. Because everyone was relating to the female protagonist who's fairly likable in the books and is obsessed with becoming a vampire. It's all she wants from day one. So the question among fans wasn't what boy do you want or whose team are you on, it was would you rather be a vampire or a werewolf? Are you sparkly and ethereal or grungy and wild? Are you the moon or the sun? Night or day? Cold or hot? It was a zodiac. A personality test mixed with what superpower would you prefer. It was about self-identity, and it was an inside secret with all the other girls, and men didn't like that. They got upset that they weren't in on the joke, and instead of reading the book so that they could be included, they tried to tear it down. They didn't like being left out, but they didn't want to do the work to engage with something the women in their lives were obsessed with. If you were and still are a man, and you read and loved these books when they came out, that's awesome. Congrats on being an objectively superior human being. But some guys made hating Twilight their entire personality. Then the first movie came out, and things got so much worse. No one anticipated how big this series would get because, again, no one was paying attention. The first movie blew up instantly, and this niche woman story turned into a national talking point. Now, are the Twilight movies good?
The skin of a killer bug.
Yes, but very much in a cult classic kind of way, where you appreciate the beautiful mess you ended up with and not in a faithful adaptation kind of way. They took some creative liberties, like telling their actors to deliver every line as if they hated words, but their unique imperfections create a one-of-a-kind experience, and one very different from the books they come from. And most importantly, none of that matters, because you don't get to hate from outside the club. Men weren't around for the build-up. They didn't see the casting hype or Stephenie Meyer sharing her inspiration playlist on the internet, and they didn't bother to read the books, so the first time they interacted with Twilight in any way was the press around these movies. And the reputation it built was like a miniature satanic panic. The vampire book was stealing everyone's wives. It was infecting their minds with visions of physically appealing, emotionally reliable life partners. Women everywhere suddenly wanted to leave their families and boyfriends for the unattainable allure of Edward Cullen. I wish any of that was a joke.
Twilight, what have you done to my wife?
I also wish I could play you that entire song. Please go watch it. News outlets were covering this phenomenon across the country. There were thousands of YouTube parodies. We've talked about lowbrow spoof movies before on this channel. There was an entire one making fun of how Twilight had brainwashed all of our women. And the biggest complaint was that reading these books was ruining marriages because Edward the Sparkly Vampire set an unrealistic standard for men, and so women were expecting too much from their husbands. Edward.
We shouldn't be friends. You don't know anything.
Can't you just thank me and get over it?
That was the bar they were failing to live up to. Seriously though, have they seen Carlisle, Jacob, Charlie? The answer is no, obviously. They still hadn't read the books. They never watched the movies that were apparently stealing their wives away. I don't understand. The divorce just came out of nowhere. Oh, also, none of this happened. To be clear, women were just enjoying their thing a little too publicly, and so men panicked. And did they up their game? Did they use the example set by this sparkly statue man to give the women what they apparently wanted?
Premiere of New Moon was a night on fire, ladies' night out and full of desire.
That guy did. The one watching Twilight, but the rest of them did Gamergate and then became Nazis. Twilight isn't even that good. There are many valid criticisms to be made about the story, the movies, the author. Stephenie Meyer is insane. She's online way too much, and she retconned a bunch of details after the books came out. The movies are their own whole damn fever dream. It's just that the people who decided it was terrible were so wrong about why that we don't even get to have the fun conversation. All because they couldn't stand that their wives had their own goddamn interests. It's the same thing with reality television or true crime or astrology. These men don't just dismiss women's interests, they outright demonize them. And if anything, this pushback only solidified relationships between women. Family members across generations could read this book and love it together and have important conversation. Daughters and their mothers could talk about boys and sex and other big concepts without it being so personalized. Twilight didn't just revitalize vampires and supernatural characters and romance, it revitalized media for women. Studios didn't consider them valuable customers before this happened. Twilight taught them that women could make them fucking money. And yet it happens again and again and again. 50 Shades of Grey restarted the entire process. It even happens with kids movies. We just saw this a few years ago with Turning Red. Pixar's 2022 film was their first one written and directed solely by a woman, and it's incredible. It follows a 13-year-old Chinese-Canadian girl growing up in Toronto in the early 2000s. Mei is confident, overachieving, outspoken, and leading a double life because while she's growing into herself at school and with her friends, she finds herself unable to disappoint her mother and immediately becomes the well-behaved daughter she's supposed to be whenever she's around. It's super stylized, feels very true to the time period, and captures all the emotional moments of being an anxious middle schooler extremely well. And that's all before it introduces the central plot device, which is a family curse passed down from mother to daughter, where they turn into giant red pandas whenever they feel intense emotion. A curse they try to contain and remove because it's obviously improper. Her parents do their best to help her suffer through until they can perform a ritual to remove it, but when her friends find out, they immediately accept and love her panda form and encourage her to use it in any way that she wants. So instead of holding it in, she learns to let her true self loose and learns to love it as well, ultimately choosing not to go through with the ritual, much to the dismay of her mother. The best part of the movie is honestly that the mother isn't just the villain. She's trying to help Mei in the way she knows best because she went through the same things. The pandas are a visual metaphor for everything these women have been forced to repress within themselves. And we're shown very clearly how much worse it is for the mom. It makes these intangible concepts into a physical reality that the characters can then interact with in a way that we can watch. If you saw it, you know it's an awesome, meaningful, heartfelt story about generational trauma, what love and acceptance really look like, how people carry unhealed pain throughout their adult lives, and how great early 2000s boy band music was, because they absolutely nailed that. And if you haven't seen it, what did you think it was about? There is a statistically high chance you thought it was about periods. Most likely because you heard someone say it's about periods. Why? Well, that's because a lot of guys didn't like it very much because it wasn't specifically about them, and so they made YouTube videos and social media posts complaining about it. Critics like Sean O'Connell from Cinema Blend accused the movie of being targeted at a small and incredibly specific audience because it was about an Asian girl in Toronto, unlike, say, Spider-Man, who's relatable specifically because most people are a white boy from Queens. Almost nobody on Earth is Asian or a girl. There is a humorous bit in the movie where the mother misinterprets her daughter's distress as getting her first period because that's a thing that happens to half of everyone on Earth every single month, but that's it. It's one joke. It's obvious to anyone who watched and paid attention that it's not what the movie is about. And the idea that a story being about women makes it somehow inaccessible to a broader audience really just makes it clear how some of these men can't comprehend women as people. The result, hilariously, is that they end up keeping secrets from themselves. If the protagonist of the story doesn't literally look like them, they can't be bothered to relate to it, and so they miss out on everything it has to offer. Meanwhile, women have this whole unintentional secret language around the experiences they all mutually went through by watching or reading these stories. You can bring up Twilight or Outlander or ACOTAR in a room full of women, and chances are you have this immediate mutual bond. Honestly, this video has been a weird line to ride because if you have watched or read enough of these stories, you likely already know all of this. If you're a woman who's had to give up on defending your interests to the men in your life after trying and failing too many times, you understand exactly why I'm making this video. But if you've never seen or even outright avoided some of this media, it's hard to explain just how misled you've been, especially without spoiling important stories that you should just be watching because they're good. And it's upsetting that I even have to sell it this hard. At this point, if you're still watching and also disagree with my base premise, I assume you're just looking for things to argue with, but also that you haven't seen most of the media I've referenced. And I highly recommend doing so if that's the case because I didn't know any of this until I expanded my media consumption. I eased into into dark and gritty storytelling kind of late into my early adulthood, but before long, I had watched Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad and Ari Aster movies, the whole spectrum, and I still had a harder time getting through some of the things I've talked about in this video. We're actually starting to see some of these themes bleed through into the male media sphere. Obsession has gotten really popular with men specifically, and that's really interesting to me because it's about a girl's struggle. The horror in the movie comes from someone losing their autonomy. It is a feminist-leaning story about like the consequences of being a woman in that situation. And that is the part that seems to be resonating with so many audiences, regardless of their gender. And if that's speaking to you, there's so much more of it available. So much of the human experience is locked behind nothing more than an unwillingness to engage with it. Learning other people's stories is how you build empathy. It's how you see other people as equally valuable and come to understand the value of your own personal experience. There's this sense that nobody can ever really know another person, that there's an impenetrable wall between you and everybody else, and then it keeps you from being understood, and likewise you from fully understanding them. But that's what storytelling is for. It's insane to be like, I'll just never understand how half the human population thinks when they're fucking telling you. We wrote it down. We made movies about it. It's all more accessible than it ever has been before. There was an internet-spanning conversation about how all women would rather run into a bear in the woods than a man, and an entire community of men still couldn't or refused to understand why. Like, is there a difference between hearing someone else's experience and living through it yourself? Of course, but that's the whole point. It's why it's important for those people to tell their own stories and for other people to hear them. For all the empathy I may have had for the way women have to constantly be on alert around every man they encounter, it has been a fundamentally different level of knowing to have strange men look at me like they own me. It's almost indescribable, but I could put it in a movie. I could recreate the experience in a work of art in a way that communicates what that experience feels like to someone who's never gone through it. I would just need them to watch it. I've alluded to it a few times, but the reason women's media is willing and able to go to these darker places is because their lived experiences are basically always darker and scarier. If a man's media is about his wife or daughter getting kidnapped and his pain and struggle of getting her back, the woman's version of that same story is getting kidnapped. No traumatized cowboy can hold a candle to the shit that women have to go through in their own genre. Your shitty ex-boyfriend who would go on for hours about how deep and twisted A Clockwork Orange was would not be able to make it through 2 episodes of the fucking Handmaid's Tale. Even when male writers try to address the same topics of the female experience, it's not the same. If you've never lived the experience of the victim, you don't know how to write an empathetic assault scene, Craig, and it often ends up being offensively voyeuristic and communicating false information about what it's like. And if you're gonna comment and say men get assaulted too, you better also have the name of a story written by a man that actually addresses that topic. You know where you can find them? Girl movies. That clip I couldn't show you from Outlander at the beginning of this video, it's a harrowing scene where one of these two is the victim, because as the lower, often victimized class, women tend to have a better understanding of the experiences of men too. And it's not because they're inherently better, they're just paying attention. Girls have been watching boy movies their whole lives. They've been listening to and watching the experiences of men and comparing what they're told to what the men actually do, which is why it's also frustrating to dislike a boy movie and then be told that I didn't get it, because that's not true. Something like Mindhunter just isn't all that shocking when you already know the serial killers think that way. Some of us are watching multi-hour-long true crime documentaries to relax. Even on a smaller scale, without direct violence or violation, women's experiences are so often just about not getting to win or not getting what they want. The average male perspective of success involves eventually being rewarded for their heroic efforts with material possessions, enlightenment, and most importantly, rest. They do the work to be impressive, complete the grand task, woo the girl, get married, and then it's done. He gets to stop. For the men's stories, the reward makes sense. That's the dream. But for women, sometimes in those same stories, their work has only just begun and they don't get what they were promised. And that's kind of the message of women's media. Men are allowed to believe that their story has a happy ending and things continue to be positive forever, whereas women's media acknowledges that there is a day that comes after happily ever after. Women have spent generations fighting for the rights to be treated equal to men and still have not even come close. Their experience is that struggling for progress does not automatically mean what follows will be just or fair. So many girl movies are specifically about deconstructing this very revelation. Their protagonists are exactly what these stories are so often accused of: naive and full of romantic romantic expectations for their lives, only to be immediately deceived, punished, and controlled for their silly, childish desires. How dare they want things? All that said, girl movies also capture a certain type of comfort and beauty that I don't really find anywhere else. The characters have deep, nuanced relationships that can feel so real it's like you personally know them. The depths of the horrors allow for equally stark moments of celebration and relief. There's also an honesty in the perspective that makes even the most wild situations feel very grounded and tangible. Also, they're cool. Katniss does some of the most metal shit I've ever seen anyone do. Musicals are fucking incredible and made with so much care and can make really deep topics so profoundly accessible. Romance as a genre has gone through an entire renaissance in the last decade or so, and out of it has come stories so emotionally rich that it has changed my understanding of what is possible to convey in writing. In Twilight, they play baseball during a thunderstorm while Supermassive Black Hole by Muse plays in the background. Boy movies could fucking never. If there's anything you take away from this video, I want it to be that you should go consume this media, specifically stories written by women. You may even be somebody who tries to watch or read as many things as you can already, but if you're only looking inside one box, then you're not actually getting as much out of that activity as you could. Maybe you're just somebody who wishes they understood women better, in which case their stories are a great place to start. Whether you're a writer or a normal, well-adjusted person, your understanding of the human condition will simply be more complete by collecting and observing as much of it as possible. This is actually my greatest passion and the driving force behind everything that I do. To narrow it down a little, I have some recommendations. First off, Mean Girls. If you haven't seen it, grab some girlfriends and your favorite movie snacks, get comfortable, and just go along for the ride. It's a story about the most naive new girl imaginable entering an American public high school for the first time and having to adjust to the social politics of the in crowd. It's written and directed by Tina Fey, it's absolutely hilarious, and it's one of the most iconic movies about being a girl that has ever been made. And despite being firmly set in the mid-2000s, it's timelessly relevant. You're also probably familiar with a dozen references from it already.
I'm sick.
Boo, you whore.
If you are a girl and this movie makes you overwhelmingly obsessed with Rachel McAdams, that's because you're gay. In a similar comedic vein, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend by Rachel Bloom is a series that deconstructs a lot of female experiences through the lens of a properly toxic main character who moves across the country to reconnect with her childhood summer fling because he's the last thing she remembers making her feel happy. She goes through a shockingly honest and definitely real-life inspired mental health spiral, and after front-loading a lot of her rom-com shenanigans, the story doesn't hold back on all of the consequences of actually doing those things. It's one of those shows where every reveal just makes all the initially random details make more and more sense. And it's a really personal look at what BPD feels like. Oh, also it's a musical sometimes.
Say it, or I'll kill your husband. I'll do it, I'll gut him like a fish.
You're a good person.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a good, such a good, real good person.
But only from her perspective. Like, it's all happening in her head. Mostly. They're loose with it, but some of the songs are truly amazing and all the characters are very lovable. If you want something more niche and depressing, I was recently introduced to a movie called Writing in Cars with Boys, which is about the life of an aspiring author who ends up stuck in a poor suburban life she never wanted, with a husband no one deserves and a son she barely likes. It's all about being dealt a shitty hand and how it's still your choice what to do with it and still your fault if you pass it on to your own kids. If you want a pure, distilled example of a female protagonist getting nothing she wanted, this is it. If you want chill lo-fi vibes in a long-running sitcom format and the ability to show women you're safe to hang out with, you should watch Gilmore Girls, a low-stakes mother-daughter story that just explores life from a casually female perspective. The story starts when Lorelai has to reconnect with her estranged parents in order to send her own daughter Rory to a good school, and just develops from there. We watch Rory grow up and Lorelai try to navigate her strange position in life as a self-made young mother with out-of-touch rich parents and the emotional maturity of a teenager. It goes for 7 seasons, it has a really unique style of fast-paced dialogue, weirdly similar to a Door Monster sketch, and it's super fun to talk to people about which characters you hate most. The correct answer is Christopher. And then, just for fun, try Moulin Rouge. It's a Baz Luhrmann musical, but it's definitely for the girls, and it's such a bizarre film, even for him. It's like someone made a movie out of magazine clippings. It's about a penniless writer who falls in love with a dying prostitute. It's a jukebox musical, but the songs are reimagined in a profoundly creative way. And Nicole Kidman just brings it so hard. Not all girl movies have to have a female protagonist, they just have to get the girl part right. Hopefully watching this video was either validating or gave you some new ideas. It honestly feels like there's so much more I could say about this topic, I just had to stop eventually. It might be a little bit before I release another one of these because I'm spending so much more time on them than I was before. But in the meantime, if you want to hear me dissect media a little bit more, you can go listen to my episode of Once More with Feeling, a podcast about movies and their remakes. It's hosted by Gus Schiff and Mariana Collin, also known as Morbid Zoo on YouTube. And I was on the recent episode about Freaky Friday. I'll put a link to that in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Please try out some of these movies, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching through that. It was very long, and I am filming it the day before it's supposed to go out. Gonna be a bad night. Read Twilight, download DaVinci Resolve, use it to edit your videos. What else? Thank you for donating on Patreon. It's very, very helpful and important right now. YouTube ad revenue is terrible and finding sponsors is hard. Thank you for watching. Either way, just happy to have eyes on these things. If you could like and share and comment and do the algorithm engagement stuff, greatly appreciated. I hope you have a great August. Is it August? And I'll see you later. I gotta go edit. Goodbye.